to see so many people joining in. That's nice. So today is technically our third class, but it's really the first one where we're going to delve specifically into one issue that we've talked about. And so today's class is specifically regarding unplanned weight loss. So let me share my screen. So type in and ask questions as we go along. You don't have to wait till the end. Okay, so this is the kind of schedule of classes that we'll be using going from here forward. So today's class is an unplanned weight loss. And then next class, which will actually be in May, time to be determined, we'll figure that out, a new schedule, will be on protein intake and the need for protein intake despite some of the restrictions some of you might have regarding your medications. And so we'll be talking about ways to make sure you're getting enough protein for adequate muscle composition and energy while still being mindful of some of those potential restrictions. So that will be next class. Today, we're going to talk about unplanned weight loss. So I breached the topic somewhat last class, but just to go over. So this issue is not specifically in people who have Parkinson's disease, although we'll talk about some specific considerations in people who do have Parkinson's. In general, unplanned weight loss is something that we worry about across the board as people age. And there's lots of reasons that we see it happen. I listed some of the top 5 or 6 reasons why in patients that I've worked with, they see weight loss. One is decreased appetite. So there's actually a physiological reason that we have decreased appetite, and that's because generally our calorie needs decrease as we age. And so part of the decrease that you have in appetite is related to decreased calorie needs. The other part of it is as we age, we tend to become less physically active, although you all are fairly, are much more physically active than a lot of people in your age demographic because of the gym. So for all of you, that's probably not the reason. But in general, as people age, they tend to have decreased physical activity, which means that you're exerting less calories and therefore you need less calories. And then the third reason for decreased appetite actually has to do with our hormonal signals from our digestive system to our brain, in that those don't necessarily always work as efficiently. And so sometimes people may actually need to eat, but their stomach is not signaling their brain really super well to like indicate that they're hungry and that they should eat. So sometimes we see that pathway a little bit disrupted as we age. And so that can also cause decreased appetite. A lot of people also may develop difficulty chewing or swallowing. So this can be related to just poor dentition or dentures not fitting well, which is a bad cycle, because if your dentures don't fit well and then you're not eating and then you lose weight, then your dentures fit even worse because once you lose, it doesn't really even take that much weight, but the bone structure and the fat structure actually in your jaw changes. And therefore, people who have lost a significant amount of weight, typically their dentures no longer fit. So that becomes an issue. Also, anything that leads to swallowing difficulty, which certainly Parkinson's plays that role. And with a lot of people that there becomes swallowing difficulty over time. And I've worked with lots of people who just say, it's just so labor intensive to eat. It takes me so long to eat that if I have to sit there for an hour and 10 minutes to eat a meal, I don't have the energy or want to put forth the effort to do that. So after a half hour, I'm just, no matter how much I've had, I'm just going to quit eating because I'm over the act of eating. So, so a lot of times, some of the consistency changes that we will make in people who have difficulty chewing or swallowing aren't necessarily even for safety, but for ease of eating. To make the act of eating easier, and therefore it won't take as long to eat, and therefore it tends to increase how much people are actually eating. We also see decreased ability to cook or feed self. So this has to do with a lot of mobility issues as well as dexterity issues, where if tremors have become an issue to the point that it's difficult to feed yourself, if your strength isn't enough that you can stand at a stove to cook for the amount of time you would have to cook a meal. So we see a lot of like transition to microwave meals or easy prep meals, which aren't necessarily always the healthiest things. Also, there could be, so I talked in decreased appetite about decreased calorie needs, but if you have a high level of tremors or some type of infectious disease process going on, that actually can increase your calorie expenditure. Or if you're trying to heal from a surgery or a wound or anything like that, that actually increases your calorie needs. So that if you don't increase your intake, but all of a sudden your calorie needs are higher, you are going to lose weight. And then another very common one that I see is altered taste. So this is typically due to medications. There's some specific medications that people take that tend to make them not taste things correctly. There also, if anyone has ever undergone radiation of any type, I see a lot of people who have sometimes permanent changes in the way that they taste or perceive certain things of tasting. I've had people tell me that things taste metallic. And so I had one woman tell me once that everything she ate tasted like she was chewing the fork. And so that's obviously not going to make you want to eat very much if you just have that metallic taste every time you eat something. So that can decrease intake. Also, our taste buds actually have decreased sensitivity as we age. So things that used to be super delicious to you maybe now taste a little bit more bland. So if as you have aged, you feel like you need more salt on foods or more seasoning on foods, that's actually why, because our taste buds don't have the same level of sensitivity that they had before. So you might feel like things need to be more flavorful in order to get the same taste sensation. So all of those are I mean, there's lots of other. If someone has cancer or something like that, which obviously is going to cause you to lose weight. But when it's people that are just kind of ticking down 1 pound at a time, half a pound a week, 2 pounds a month, but it's consistent, these tend to be the reasons most often that I see. So the reason that I worry about it, or that as dietitians we worry about it, is because unplanned weight loss has a direct link to an increased risk of illness and death. So hospitalizations are highly linked with weight loss over the age of 65. And this is even in people who are overweight. So I know I stressed this last time, but I'm going to stress it again in case anyone wasn't here. Even if your BMI is over like the cutoff where you are quote unquote overweight or you're quote unquote obese, over the age of 65, the research is very clear that maintaining your weight actually ends up with better health outcomes for the duration of your life than losing weight. And if there is weight loss, if it's monitored and at an extremely slow rate, sometimes we can manage that. But in general, there is not research proving that people who lose significant amounts of weight over 65, even if they were obese, end up with better health outcomes. So this is sometimes something that I've had to battle with a lot of physicians over the years because sometimes people go to their doctor and they'll say, oh, you lost 20 pounds. That's great. And I'm in the background going, no, why are they losing 20 pounds? Like, that's my question. Why are you losing 20 pounds? And how fast was that? And are you trying? And, there's always a million follow-up questions I have, because to me, that's a huge red flag of we have to make sure there's something not happening. The reason that weight loss over 65 tends to lead to poor health outcomes is because although we would like to think that when we're losing 20 pounds that it's all fat, that is not the case. Weight loss over 65 tends to lead to fairly significant muscle mass decreases. And so of the 20 pounds that you lost, maybe 10 of them were fat, maybe. It's usually less than that. And the rest is all lean tissue, which is absolutely what we don't want to be losing, especially if you have Parkinson's disease. So that's the biggest reason that it flags to me as being such a major issue that I worry about. So it leads to muscle mass decrease. It also leads to increased risk of illness, because if you are losing weight at such a rate, you likely have inadequate protein stores. And remember, last class we chatted about your immune cells being made of proteins and amino acids. And so if your protein stores are low, then your immunity function is impaired. And so unplanned weight loss increases your risk of illness. It also increases your risk of skin breakdown because, again, our skin is made of protein molecules. And if you are losing weight, then you don't have enough calories to support good health of your skin. So you're at a higher risk of wounds and pressure ulcers and such. And then it also leads to generalized malnutrition. So nutrient deficiencies of like vitamins and mineral deficiencies as well, which then tend to have a cascade effect of leading to other issues. So if someone's malnourished and they're protein malnourished, and they've lost 20 pounds, oftentimes they're going to end up low in certain micronutrient levels. If you look at their blood work, low folate, for example, or low B12, and those things can actually end up having pretty significant cognitive impacts, as well as some other issues. So you might start to see people seeming confused or seeming, to act different or not having as great of a memory. And it actually can be related to a nutrient deficiency that is stemming from weight loss. So my goal is to ensure adequate protein and calorie intake to prevent any of those negative impacts as we age. So this, if we want to bring it specifically to Parkinson's disease, there actually was a study called the PINE study. It was done out of Scotland, I think maybe 4 years ago now. And it actually showed that in people in the study who had Parkinson's disease, weight loss was associated with significant increase in the rates of dementia and significant increase in dependency on a caregiver. So physical dependency on a caregiver. So those are some, like a specific weight loss study that was done with Parkinson's. So I kind of briefly talked about some causes, but when we break all those reasons down and look at it just from a numbers standpoint, if we are consuming less calories than we are using, that is going to lead to weight loss every time. So if your calories that you're using is greater than the calories you're taking in, you will always have weight loss. Regardless of what the reason is, you will end up with weight loss. So these are kind of some of the specific things that we talked about before, but these are a little bit more skewed towards Parkinson's disease. So there can be, as I said, increased calorie intake related to tremors. So regardless of the cause, the issue with this through all of these that I'll talk about is that we have to find a way to get you more calories, right? No matter which one of these is the reason, our goal is going to be to get you more calories somehow. Long-term Sinemet use also can lead to something called dyskinesia. That can lead to decreased intake and weight loss. Again, decreased appetite. I bring this one up because we'll do a whole class on it. So constipation and slowed GI motility. Constipation, as I'm sure some of you are very familiar with, is a very common side effect of having Parkinson's disease. When people are constipated, we naturally send less signals to our brain telling us to eat. So when someone's chronically constipated, you almost always will see a decrease in their intake. Also, when you have food sitting in various areas of the digestive system for longer than they should, you are impacting nutrient absorption. So there's everything that you eat has a very specific part of your digestive system where it's supposed to be broken down and absorbed. And if for some reason it's stuck in one place for too long, then you can actually not absorb it as well. Or if then you cycle between constipation and diarrhea, and then things are going through your system too quickly, sometimes our body doesn't have the ability to absorb it fast enough. So whenever you're having GI motility, so issues with constipation, diarrhea, things moving through your digestive system, that's always going to impact how much you're absorbing of what you eat, which is a problem because in this situation, even if you're eating enough calorie-wise, your body may not be using or able to get enough calories from what you're eating. So dealing with constipation is one of the first things that I always assess and try to treat when I'm trying to figure out how to get people more calories, making sure that that's not going on. Depression also There's the high risk for depression in people with Parkinson's disease, and depression is known to lead to decreased intake in some people. In some people, depression actually tends to increase their intake, but what we've seen in studies related to Parkinson's and depression, we almost always see a decrease in calorie intake. Swallowing difficulty, I already talked about. And then there could be other reasons outside of Parkinson's. So just because you have Parkinson's doesn't mean that that is the reason why you're losing weight, which I think is something that I think I want to stress and say that's important, because when you have one diagnosis, that is such a serious diagnosis, right? Everything starts to be kind of blamed on that. And so sometimes what I see is that people stop looking for other reasons why something might be happening, because they just say, oh, well, they have Parkinson's. People with Parkinson's lose weight. That's what we see. Well, maybe, but maybe it's something else. So if we don't really think that you're eating less and we think you're probably meeting your calorie needs, then maybe it's not related to Parkinson's disease. And maybe it's something like your thyroid function is off, or there could be other reasons why you're losing weight. So I just want to kind of put that out there, that although you're at a higher risk, if you have a Parkinson's diagnosis, you're at a higher risk of losing weight. Don't automatically think that that's automatically the reason, and that there's nothing you can do about it, because it always should lead to some type of investigation. But specifically for Parkinson's, why we worry about it mostly, there are some studies that were shown. There's one specifically that I looked at recently that showed that someone with Parkinson's, and this was in a group who did suffer from tremors, they were consuming 350 calories a day extra than the group who did not have Parkinson's disease, and the Parkinson's group was still losing weight, despite the fact they were consuming 350 extra calories a day. So when I say that sometimes there's increased calorie needs, like it's been proven in studies. Another thing that I haven't brought up so far, another one is smelling loss of smell. That also can lead to decreased intake, and there is definitely a connection that we see with that. I think that's been brought out a lot more in the media now, because COVID people lose their sense of smell. So we've heard a lot about loss of sense of smell and how that impacts your intake. And because if we can't smell, like 80% roughly of our sense of taste is actually utilizing our sense of smell. So if you're on a medication, or you've somewhat lost your sense of smell, or your sense of smell has been altered, you're not going to taste things the same. So that can be another thing that plays into this. Loss of sense of smell outside of COVID is usually medication related. There's some specific medications that can cause that to happen. But as I said, so kind of if someone was losing weight, this is the checklist that I would go through to say, okay, do we think any of these things are the reason? Do we think that these are the things we need to address? If it's not any of these, then yes, we look outside of Parkinson's for thyroid function, inflammatory markers, making sure that you don't have any cancer starting to develop, or something like that. That can be one of the first signs of cancer, actually, in a lot of people is weight loss. So I've had patients who suddenly have lost 40 pounds and don't know why, and it ends up that they have some type of cancer developing. So weight loss, especially unplanned, is never anything you should ignore or be happy about. And it's something that we always need to look into why. Also, women tend to be more impacted by this, I will say. Generally, because women have a lower body weight to begin with, unplanned weight loss puts you at more of a risk of malnutrition if you are a woman. And studies have shown that unplanned weight loss in women who also tend to have lower amounts of physical activity are the most prone Parkinson's disease patients who lose weight and have cognitive impacts related to that. So you all are fairly active, but still as a woman, you have a higher risk. So for weight loss, how much is too much? So like I said, if you lose, 2 pounds in a month or something, that's not anything that I'm going to all of a sudden, freak out about. But if you have lost 2 pounds a month every month for a year, then I'm gonna start to take notice of that. Everyone has some, especially women, have weight fluctuations related to fluid retention and lots of different reasons. So if your weight fluctuates within a 5-pound range, that's normal. So one of the reasons that I tell people to keep an eye on their weight, at least monthly, is to make sure that you know what your fluctuating kind of normal range is, so that if all of a sudden it's different one day than it was last month, weigh yourself again in a few days and kind of try to establish what your normal fluctuation range is. So like when people say, oh, I had a giant piece of cake yesterday and then I weighed myself today and I gained 2 pounds. You did not gain 2 pounds from cake. You didn't. That's your normal fluctuation range. So there is nothing that will hit you that fast, I promise. So kind of know what your normal range is. And then if you all of a sudden weigh yourself and you're outside of that range, don't panic, but take note and then maybe weigh yourself the following week to see where you're at. In general, we would say that weight loss starts to be concerning when you have lost over 5% in a month or 10% in 6 months. That's kind of the two things that I would look at most specifically. So if you, for example, just for argument's sake, if you weighed 100 pounds and next month you weighed yourself and you were 95, that's a 5% loss in 1 month. That to me is concerning. Or if you weighed 100 and then over the course of 6 months, all of a sudden you weighed 90, that's 10% loss, and then I would be concerned. So it's the 5, that's kind of roughly when the big red flag goes up. The average weight loss, when they have looked at weight loss in people who have Parkinson's disease, in the 10 years pre-diagnosis, which is an interesting thing, they actually tend to see weight loss pre-diagnosis, which this is another reason that we think there's a gut-brain connection, right? We think there's something going on with the digestive system before you're diagnosed with Parkinson's. Average weight loss in the time leading up to diagnosis in the 10 years prior is about 5 pounds. In the 8 years post-diagnosis, that goes up and we tend to see about an 8-pound loss. So about a pound a year on average, which 1 pound a year isn't going to be a huge red flag. But when we look at trends, which is really what I care about, and you lost, 8 pounds, depending on what your size was initially, that might be enough that I'm starting to worry about malnutrition. In general, people who have Parkinson's disease lose about almost 9 pounds more than people who don't have Parkinson's disease in the first 4 years of your diagnosis. So in that first 4 or 5 year range, if you were to compare someone who was diagnosed with Parkinson's to a group that was not, the Parkinson's group tends to lose almost 8 pounds more than the other. So there are statistics that show that weight loss is a significant problem. There are studies, again, that show a direct relationship between your risk of death and being underweight. So when I ask here what a good BMI is, so I put that in quotes because BMI is not really my favorite measurement, but it's unfortunately the only one we have a lot of times. So BMI essentially is your body mass index, and it's a ratio of your height to your weight. And so if we do that calculation and you fall between 18.5 and 24.9, that's what we consider the ideal range. If you are over 24 up to about 30, that you would be put in the overweight category. If you're over 30, you would actually be put in the obese category. If you're under 8.5, we consider you underweight and at a high risk of malnutrition. People whose BMI falls under that 18.5 have a significantly increased risk of early death. So that's the BMI. So I don't always love BMI as a measurement. What I actually would rather have done, but it's not always possible, is a body fat analysis. I care more what your fat percentage is actually than your BMI. Because, for example, an athlete who has a lot of muscle mass can end up having a BMI that says they're obese, but really, obviously, they're not obese in terms of like health risk. It just happens to be that they have a lot of muscle and therefore their weight is higher. So that's why I don't necessarily love that. But when you go to the doctor, this is what they're putting your chart on to tell you, are you obese? Are you not obese? Right. And so to figure out your calorie needs, there's probably 125 different ways out there, different calculations you can do to figure out your calorie needs. In general, kind of a quick and dirty way is 25 to 35 calories per kilogram per day in women and 30 to 40 calories per kilogram per day in males. So last time, remember I said to figure out your weight in kilograms is you take your weight in pounds, you divide that by 2.2. So that is your weight in kilograms. And so then you would multiply that amount by this range, depending on male or female. I always am going to give you, anybody that I work with, a range of calories. Unless I'm hooking you up to a machine and it's directly measuring your respiration and your body fat and all of this, there's no possible way I can do any calculation to give you exactly to the calorie how much you need, right? It's always going to be a range. And it varies from day to day based on how physically active you are. So you should always try to aim to be in a certain range of calories, not a specific target calorie. One of the things that is important if you are losing weight and we need to increase your calorie needs and we increase your calories, one of the easiest ways to do that is people start to add a lot of fat to their diet, which is not really what we want to do. The research shows that adding a lot of fat to your diet to increase calories is not necessarily helpful long-term in maintaining weight. So we want to have your increase in calories come from a variety of sources. So an increase in carbohydrates, an increase in fats, and an increase in protein. So not just one thing. So unfortunately, you can't just start adding gravy to everything and say, all right, now I'm eating a ton of calories. That's not going to be helpful. So how much is enough? So when I sit down with somebody who's losing weight and we figure out how much roughly they're currently eating now on average, and then I figure, okay, well, we need to increase it by, say, 250 calories or 300 calories. How do you know that? So the way that I would have someone do that is to keep a food journal, which you could do that on paper, or now there's a million apps on your phone if you have a smartphone that can do that for you. One that is pretty good I've had people ask me for good ones. One that's pretty good is MyFitnessPal, actually. That has a pretty good database of foods in there in terms of like pretty much anything you put in there, they have information on. So you would keep a food journal. I usually have people keep it for a whole week because again, we're looking at averages. We're not looking at one day. We're looking over the course of a week, how much generally are you consuming? So we would do that and we would look and see, all right, are you increasing your intake? Minimally 3 days. So I know it's a little bit cumbersome for some people to do it for a whole week, but so a minimum of tracking, I would say, is for 3 days. And then when I look at that, of what someone is eating, the things I look at are the time of day where people are eating the best and where they're eating the worst, where they tend to be most hungry, where they tend to kind of have to force themselves to eat. What are the times of day where you tend to want a snack? Those are all the things where I kind of am looking. And my goal usually is not to overhaul what you're currently doing, but try to figure out where we can make little improvements to improve your nutritional profile of what you're eating. So one of the first things I do is identify what's called empty foods. So although popcorn, for example, is fine for most people, you're not getting anything from that. So if you're losing weight and your favorite snack in the evening is popcorn, I'm probably going to have you either add something to that or change that snack up most of the time because you're not really benefiting nutritionally from that as a snack. The same when people tell me that they eat a few saltines. Well, if you're hungry, there's better things that we could get you to eat than saltines. So not that saltines are bad for you, but they're just not optimizing your nutrition. So especially in people, if you are struggling with appetite and you're not hungry a lot and you're finding that you have to somewhat force yourself to eat, then anytime you do feel like eating, we need to get like the most jam-packed, nutrient dense, like bang for your buck thing that we possibly can get in you, right? I don't want you wasting that hunger that you feel on saltine crackers or jello or something like that, right? Like let's give you some crackers and but add cheese to it or add peanut butter to it or have a Greek yogurt or something that are actually going to benefit you. So that's one of the first things that I do. The second thing is evaluate your snacking habits. So, like I said, what time of day do you tend to want a snack? And then we will brainstorm what your best choices for snacking would be at that time. If you don't eat breakfast, that is the one thing I'm going to try to shift you to do is eat breakfast. 20% of your calories should be consumed within the first 2 to 3 hours of you waking. That sets up your day to have your best metabolic activity, to have your most stable blood glucose levels. It prevents overeating of unhealthy foods later in the day. And if you're someone who is struggling with adequate intake, you cannot have that many hours go by in the morning without you eating something. So that is the one thing that I will try to force on people, even if they don't really like it. Certainly in Parkinson's, we always have to think about the medication interaction, especially if you're on Cinemet, levodopa, because there are protein considerations for that, which can be difficult, but can be worked around. So that's just kind of an individualized thing that we would work on. There's other things too, certain cholesterol medications and Coumadin or, things like that have specific potential food interactions that we would look at. My biggest thing that I want to stress is supplements are not always the answer. So it's very easy in the health field, and I've seen it for 15 years in working with older adults. Too many health practitioners go-to response when someone's losing weight is, oh, start drinking Ensure. So of everyone that is on right now, how many by show of hands have been told to drink a supplement or Ensure at some point from a doctor or a nurse or someone that you've seen? Not too many. That's good. Because I see it a lot. And it's something that is a kind of a pet peeve of mine. Because first of all, I always want people to consume real whole food whenever you can. Because that's the way our body's meant to eat, right? We're not meant to be on a liquid diet. We're not meant to drink our protein per se, right? We're meant to eat real whole food that has combination nutrients in it. And that's how we digest and absorb things best. So if we can get whole food answers, then we're always going to go with that. Also, supplements are very expensive, like very expensive. They aren't necessarily the best tasting things. And so people tend to get what I call taste fatigue on them, where they've drank too many of them and now they can't even look at it again. And there may be times in your life where we have to give you a supplement. So I would rather save that, save the supplement for the time in your life where you really, really need it. Because when I get to a point with someone where I think they need a supplement, that's because I've run out of my bag of tricks of any other intervention. And so I would rather have you save your consumption of those items until we really, really need it. So I would rather make adjustments to your normal eating pattern. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I guess I want you all to know about, at least me as a dietitian. I am not the food police. I am not the dietitian who is going to tell you what you shouldn't be eating, really. I'm more going to tell you what you should be eating and how we can figure out how to get those things in your meal plan. So I don't tend to give out menus. And the reason for that is because I could give you a menu, but if that's not how you normally eat, then I'm essentially no better than any of these diet books or people on TV that are telling you to like eat a certain way. That's not helpful. And that's not something that people can do long term. So when I say that I'm going to look at your food journal, That's partly to figure out how you normally eat and how we can like substitute and make little tweaks, not change the way you eat. I never want I never want my patients to feel that they are on a diet when they are changing nutritional options with me. I want them to just feel like they're trying to eat a little bit healthier, and incorporating that into their normal eating pattern. So you want to, if weight loss is an issue, summary of this slide, you want to optimize time of day where your intake is the best, where you have the potential to get the best calories. And if your intake is low at other times of day, investigate why that is. So the plan I would typically come up with for someone, as I said, optimize the time of day where the best intake potential is. So if you are someone who's really hungry, kind of mid-morning, but then as the day goes on, you get less and less hungry. And by the time dinner rolls around, you usually are kind of tired and you don't have much energy and you don't really feel like eating. Then I know for a lot of us, dinner traditionally is the bigger meal. But guess what? There is no rule that says that that has to be for the rest of your life. So we don't have to have dinner be your biggest meal. If you're most hungry and feel the most like eating mid-morning, let's make that your biggest meal, because that's when we can get the most nutrition in you. So that's fine. So one of the things is letting go of maybe the food rules that you've had over your whole life. And so when you're most hungry, when you feel like you can eat the most, that's where we should try to eat the most. Also, another thing, when you are hungry, don't lose it. I've worked with a lot of people who have poor intake or poor appetite. And I've had them say, oh, I feel hungry usually around like 4:30, but I wait until dinner. Don't wait until dinner. Because what happens with a lot of people is you're hungry at 4:30, but then dinner, quote unquote, dinner time comes around at 5:15. And then you're kind of not so hungry and you don't eat much dinner because by then you weren't really hungry. So you missed it. Like you missed the chance of the day where we could have gotten some good nutrition in you. So if you're hungry, do not wait for a mealtime or some other reason. Take advantage of the time when you feel like you could eat something. And when I say investigate why intake is low at other times of day, it could be just because that's the normal way of that you've eaten forever, or it could be medication related. It could be that you've never been a breakfast person and so you don't eat breakfast in the morning. So like I said, I'm going to challenge you to try to get some calories in. That is probably the most frequent time where I would recommend supplements to people. If you are not a breakfast eater and you can't stomach the thought of eating breakfast, that is the one time a day that I would say consider drinking some calories then. Because drinking is usually easier for people than eating if it's a period of time where they're not super hungry. So like my grandmother, for example, I have her drink a supplement drink in the morning. She's not a breakfast eater. She never has been her whole life. But I now have her where she drinks half a supplement in the morning by 8 o'clock, because at least that way she's getting something in. And then she usually gets hungry around like 10. But that's fine. She actually eats at 10, but she gets up at 5. So for her to wait from 5 a.m. till 10 a.m. when she's hungry is absolutely not okay. So that's the one time where supplements sometimes can come in handy. As I said before, minimize the intake of empty foods. If you are losing weight, let's make them as most nutritious as possible. Another one is make your drinks count. So a lot of what I'm saying right here might be the complete opposite of what you've heard dietitians say for your whole life. And that's because all nutrition recommendations tend to be skewed towards losing weight that you hear in the media. That's the only thing anybody ever talks about, losing weight and being on a diet. So this is kind of the anti-diet. This is when you are struggling to keep your weight on. So in this case, you would want to make your drinks count. So yes, water is the best fluid that we can drink. However, if you are someone who is really struggling to keep your weight on and stop from losing weight, some of those drinks in a day, I don't want to be water. I want it to be something that you're going to get some calories from. So sometimes I want it to be milk. And if in the morning, maybe that's a half a cup of juice, or it's a milkshake, or something that has some calorie content to it. And if you're not diabetic, and you are someone who's losing weight and you like to have, a little cup of soda a day, I would say don't have it be diet, have it be regular, because diet soda is not giving you any calories. So what matters, as I said before, is your total calories. So calories in versus calories out, that matters. But also where they come from does matter. So we don't want all your calories coming from sugars. You don't want all of your calories coming from fat. Your body works best when your calories are coming from a combination of foods. So carbs, fat, and protein together. So anytime that I recommend a snack to somebody or a meal, I always want to see all three of those components in what you're eating. I want a fat source, a carb source, and a protein source in everything that you eat, whether it's a snack or a meal. So like when I said before, I don't want to see somebody just eat crackers. I want that to be crackers with peanut butter or crackers with cheese or cheese and an apple, something like that, but always a combination. My plan also then would usually include adjustment for those medications if those are an issue. The other time that I tend to use supplements is if I'm working with somebody who has Parkinson's and they take Cinemet 4 times a day, that becomes tricky to meet their protein needs without supplementation. I will say that. So if you're someone in that situation, we may have to talk about certain times a day, maybe adding in some supplements. And then overall, as I said before, get the biggest bang for your buck. So if you are not very hungry and you can only eat, half a cup of food, we need that to be the most jam-packed, nutrient-dense cup of food you've ever seen. We cannot have that be something that doesn't have very much to it, right? I will give you one slide about supplements, because don't get me wrong that I'm anti-supplements. I'm not. I'm just anti-supplement use in most situations. Common brands that are on the market are Ensure, Resource, Glucerna. Glucerna is marketed as a diabetic supplement, although I will tell you that the actual carbohydrate content of Glucerna versus regular Ensure is not actually that different. So Glucerna really is a bit more of a marketing trick towards diabetics than anything, honestly. The generic versions of these, so like the Kinney's brand or the Walgreens brand or the Walmart brand, they're fine. You do not have to buy name brand supplements. Resource, I like sometimes as a supplement because they also have juice-based options. So it's not, they don't only have like those creamy milk type options. Resource, there's a Resource juice, a Resource breeze that is a good, it tastes more like juice. So I gave you this link, or I will send Pat this link. Let me go to the site for you. We'll stop that share and then go to the website. So I gave you the link to this website. It's a supplement company called Orgain. And I highlight this one because they have supplements which are, they do like grass-fed whatever, which is fine. But the reason I like them is because they have a brand right here, which is vegan. And so it is dairy-free, it's soy-free, it's gluten-free, it's kosher, and it doesn't taste like you're chewing on a piece of chalk. So a lot of these supplements really have a very kind of chalky, not great aftertaste. This one, I would say, is your best bet to not have that. Sorry, my computer's working really slow. So this is their regular brand here, the Orgain Nutrition Shake. This vegan brand, it comes in chocolate or vanilla. But this is the one that is soy-free, dairy-free, gluten-free, all of those things, which if you're somebody who struggles with some GI issues and kind of is intolerant to a lot of things, this is a really great shake. I actually am an ambassador for this brand, and not because I make any money off of them, but because I have digestive issues, like pretty bad. And this is a shake that I can actually drink and it doesn't bother my stomach. So I know from firsthand experience that this is a good one. Because even though Ensure, for example, is lactose free, it still has milk proteins in it. So if you are somebody that dairy bothers, even the lactose free supplements might still bother you because of the protein source that it comes from. It's still a milk-based protein. These specifically are not. This is a plant-based protein, but it's not soy. So I just wanted to give you that. If we were in person, I would give you samples of of this just so you could try it. And at some point, maybe I can. If you are someone who thinks that you could benefit from that and you want to send your information to Pat, I actually can send people free samples of this right to your house if you like. If you're someone who thinks that you need such a thing, you would just have to provide me with your home address and your email, and I could send those out to you. So
could we get them to like the gym?
yeah. Well, the only thing is, like, I can only they allow me to send two bottles worth to anywhere that I send it. So, but no, I could send it to I could send one like to you personally. Like, it has to be a patient of mine, so it would have to have like your name, not the gym's name. But yeah, I can send samples out if somebody thinks that would be helpful to them.
We'll do it that way, one by one.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, just notify Pat if that's something that you think would be helpful for you. Oh, hang on. I have to go back to sharing. I think we're just about done with that. Okay. So yes, so that that supplement is Orgain, Orgain, if you want to look. One of the things that I do like to bring up when we're talking about supplements, if you are somebody who has used like protein powder or something like that, there is a difference between plant-based proteins and animal proteins in terms of how well we digest them. Animal proteins are more biologically available to us, so we absorb them better. So if you are someone who's consuming a lot of plant-based proteins, then you actually usually need to increase your intake a little bit just to make sure that you're getting the same level of absorption, because plant proteins are not complete proteins. So that's something, if you're someone who follows more of a vegetarian or vegan diet, that's a consideration that I always tell people to make. As I said before, of any of these supplements, the generic version is typically equivalent. It's actually usually made in the same plant. It's just a different packaging. And then another thing is to consider making your own. So if you take Carnation Instant Breakfast and mix that into whole milk, you very close to have made your own Ensure, only for about a 15th of what Ensure costs. So you can certainly make your own supplements without having to pay the very high price that a lot of these supplement drinks are, if that's something that you think is helpful or needed in your diet. And then these are just some of the research papers that I quoted if you were interested in looking at such a thing. So, as I yammered on forever, does anybody have any questions?
What was that resource, not resource, but the supplement you make it on your own? How do you do that again?
Okay, so Carnation Instant Breakfast.
Okay.
You can get it in a can, or you can get it in like a box, and there's lots of different flavor options if you get the box. But the box itself is only, I think, like $3.99, and it has 12 servings in it maybe. If you mix that with whole milk, calorie and protein wise, you're really close to an Ensure. Okay. But whereas a 6-pack of Ensure is, depending on where you get it, up to $9-ish. So it's significantly less expensive, especially if you're someone who's drinking it every single day. Because unfortunately, in 15 years of working in nutrition, I have only gotten Ensure covered by insurance companies twice in my whole career, and both of them were cancer patients. So outside of that, I have never been able to get Ensure or any type of supplement covered by insurance. And as I said, they're very expensive. So if you're someone who's drinking one of those every day, you're talking, $100 to $200 a month, just in supplements. So any way that you could potentially make your own is way more cost effective.
Is 1% milk acceptable, or does it have to be whole milk?
All right, I'm so glad that you asked that, Ron. So when I say get the biggest bang for your buck, one of the ways that we do that, if you are losing weight, is don't drink 1% milk. If someone is losing weight, I want you buying high test whole milk with the red top, because you're missing a chance of about 200 calories per glass. So the protein will be the same, but the calories aren't. So if we struggle with weight loss and you are drinking a glass of milk, let's think of optimizing the nutrition and make that whole milk.
Well, the reason I was asking was I have an issue with belly fat. That's where my excess weight is.
Okay.
What's the best way to control that other than exercising?
Yeah. Unfortunately, where you store fat is something that we have extremely little control over. That's a genetic determination of where you store fat. So that comes from like your parents. And so that is just where your body prefers to have your storage area. So there's no way of eating, despite what magazines or fitness shows or something might tell you. There is no nutritional way to change the way that you store fat in terms of location. So any of those pills that say like, get rid of stubborn belly fat, or no, like there's literally nothing that would actually do that. Like if you have excess fat, it is going to store where it stores. There's no pill or supplement or food or any way that you could change that. As far as 1% milk for the general population, yes, a 1% milk, skim milk is fine because you don't need the extra fat. But if you are someone that I'm telling to increase calories, so like put the Carnation Instant Breakfast in the milk, why would we buy a low calorie milk and then add a high calorie powder to it, right? That's contradictory. So if someone's adding like a protein or extra calories to their meal plan, then again, I would rather have you just eat the real food and get it that way. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It makes sense nutritionally, but I was wondering, are there other options to control your belly fat?
Not from nutrition, if we're talking specifically about fat location.
Could be exercising, maybe.
It's really, exercise. I mean, even, I don't know, Pat, you can probably speak better to that, but I don't even know through exercise if we can control that so much.
The issue is that you can't like spot reduce.
Right.
Exercise you'll generally lose weight, and you can tone certain areas with exercise, but that subcutaneous tissue on top of the muscle, you cannot spot lose that.
Right.
Not even with 100 crunches or something like that.
You can't. So yeah, and it's the same with nutrition. So like we can't, and I hate that like the media pushes that that's such a possibility to be able to do that, because that's just not how our body works. Like our body would not say, all right, today we are going to burn all these fat cells in my hips, but not anywhere else. Like that's just not, our body does not make that distinction. So yeah, unfortunately, yeah. And men generally are going to have more storage of fat abdominally, and women are going to have more storage of fat like through hip thigh area. Like that's just kind of evolutionarily, that's where we tend to store fat. But yes, that is not really diet controlled.
I tried.
There lies that old saying, Rob. A moment on your lips, a lifetime on your hips.
Right.
Jerry, do you have any wise words?
I wanted to ask about, everybody's surprised at how much I weigh because I don't look that much. I weigh 190 pounds. I'm only I lost 2 inches, by the way. Used to be 5'10", I'm now 5'8". But that doesn't mean I'm overweight, does it?
So that's part of the reason that I hate the BMI chart, because if we just looked on the BMI chart, it would say yes, that you're overweight with those height weight proportions. But what I would rather do, and what I try to do when I can, is do like a body composition analysis, because what that tells me is what percentage you are of bone, water, muscle, fat. And that is a much, much truer indication of health than looking at your BMI and saying, oh, you're overweight because like you fall in this category.
Right.
So when I actually have ever done weight loss classes or nutrition classes in general, I actually have a machine, like a handheld machine. It's not a great one. At SU, where I teach, we have like an actual like it looks like a little tiny spaceship that you can get into, and we close it and it's a hyperbaric chamber and it actually measures like every single thing in your body. But most people don't have those. So I just have like a cheaper little handheld one. But still, I use that actually as a marker of how well people are improving, rather than I use that in measurements rather than the scale or their BMI. Somebody can weigh the exact same thing, but completely change their body composition and be significantly healthier, right? So, and we see that when people start eating healthier and then increasing their physical activity, is they kind of replace their fat stores with their muscle stores. So their weight, if they're looking on a scale, might not change whatsoever. And so if you're only looking at that, you're super disappointed and discouraged. But if I do the body composition analysis, I can show that your body fat percentage has maybe decreased by 2 or 3%, which is much more important for health than what you actually weigh.
Right.
So yeah. It's the reason that like I said, that like athletes, they technically will flag as obese or overweight. Like Michael Phelps, we all know Michael Phelps, like the Olympic swimmer. His BMI shows that he's obese. So on that chart, he's obese. Yeah. So
That's interesting.
anything else?
And the opposite is true too.
What's
I'm same weight the whole pandemic, but I had really bad habits, and I should have gained 20 pounds. I'm lucky I didn't, but
yeah. So when people lose muscle mass but are gaining fat mass at the same time, yeah. Mm-hmm. And we do see that a lot in you see that a lot in athletes actually, when they stop doing their sport, that their weight will stay the same. They don't gain weight, but their body composition completely changes.
Yeah. But so those guys saved me from killing myself by giving us activities.
Yeah. Do you have one in the gym? That would be an interesting thing. Maybe we should write a grant for that.
What?
We should write a grant for a body composition analysis.
Oh, okay.
Equipment in the gym.
But,
it would be really interesting, like to track for people that participate in the program in terms of muscle mass and such.
Any idea how much it costs?
How accurate are those scale type ones that stand down with wet feet?
Yeah.
And they'll give you a body fat, but I'm
They're
not sure how accurate.
A lot of them actually are not awful. I mean, they're not going to give you the same level as like the bod pod will that we have,
Right.
but that's $250,000. So, what I actually usually do, because what happens with the scale ones you step on is it tends to measure like lower body composition, whereas the ones you hang on to tend to measure upper body composition. So what I usually do is I do both and I average them.
Oh, okay.
But both of those pieces of equipment are a couple $100 each.
Yeah, we could definitely do that.
But that would be something. Sidebar. But but that would be a good thing, I think, to have for the gym, to be able to show like improvements in all your body composition when you go to the gym, you know.
Pat has all the time in the world to do that, you know.
Yeah.
Pat's a good grant writer. Pat's good
He
at
must
getting
be.
money.
He must be.
He
That would
has-
be a good motivation to come to the gym too.
Right, see?
very educational. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good, thank you all for joining. So we'll get to you of when the next one is.